and welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 5 commander cards that I think should see more play. So I've completed my 10 card series of cards that are really not well known, that don't see enough play, and of course, there's always going to be more cards coming out that I think need to see more play. So I wouldn't say I'm starting a new series here, but every once in a while I'm going to throw out a video like this of cards that I just come across every once in a while, just from playing games or from doing deck doctors or deck techs or whatever, and I'll see these cards and I'm just thinking, man, how come that's not in more decks? I don't see that card nearly enough. These cards aren't ones that are unheard of. They aren't secrets that nobody knows about. These are all cards that people have seen before, but I think should probably be in more decks than they are, and I will have numbers to back up my claims here. So I'm going to start out with Kogla the Titan Ape, 3 green, legendary creature, ape 7/6. When it enters the battlefield, fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. When it attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls. So right out of the gate, you have a card that is removal in several different aspects. It kills creatures, which if you're in a mono green deck, that can sometimes be an issue for you, but also destroys artifacts and enchantments. So that's a great card. It's going to be very usable in any deck, but the reason why I'm specifically mentioning it is because of that last ability. 1 and a green, return target human you control to its owner's hand. Kogla gains indestructible until end of turn. And the reason why I think this should see more play is because really you could throw this card in any deck where your commander is a human, right? Because if your commander is a human, obviously, someone casts a board wipe, I can now return my human commander to my hand so it doesn't get killed, and then also my Kogla gains indestructible, so it's likely not going to die as well. So on top of all the other things that you're doing in your deck, Kogla is going to save your commander. There is 114 human commanders in the format that are green. That's a whole lot of commanders that could be playing this guy. Now, he might not necessarily fit the theme of what you're doing, but again, the fighting, the artifact, and enchantment destruction, on top of the fact that this is a card that will save your commander from removal. And then the added bonus, as I talked about in my old Rutstein underwhelming commander video, if your commander has an ETB or a reason you want to play it again, it's even more of an added bonus. So I really think this guy should be in the 99 of more decks. Coming in at number 4, another card I've talked about at length, and I still don't understand why it isn't getting played more. Auric Lore Mage, 2 black, human warlock, 3/3. Tap, search your library for a card, put it into your graveyard, then shuffle. If it's an instant or sorcery card, put a +1/+1 counter on Auric Lore Mage. This is just a repeatable entomb. You can search your library for any card and put it into your graveyard. This is in less than 10,000 decks on EDH Rec, which to me is way less than it should be. There is 127 commanders that are black in the format that are in one way or another dealing with their graveyard. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to be wanting to put stuff in your graveyard just because your commander is dealing with the graveyard, but probably most of the time it is the case. And I know people, sort of hate on this card a little bit because it's 4 mana and you can't use it right away. You got to wait a turn before you can use it. It dies to removal easily, so your opponents can just get rid of it before you can use it. I just, dies to removal is a really bad argument. That works for any card. Smothering Tithe is not a bad card because your opponents can just easily remove it. You're going to play it anyway with the hopes that they're not going to remove it right away, and you're going to play your Auric Lore Mage with the hopes they're not going to remove it right away. I mean, this argument that I hear all the time sort of collapses in on itself. If this is not a great card, then why are your opponents going to use removal on it, right? Either a card is really, really good and you're going to want to play it, and then your opponents are going to want to remove it, or a card is really not that great and it's not that threatening, so therefore your opponents aren't going to use the removal on it. So either way, this card should be going in way more decks. And the fact that it costs 4 doesn't mean a whole lot if your commander costs more than 4, right? If you're in a Gitrog deck, which again, I think this card's an auto include, your commander costs 5. So this guy is going to come out the turn before your commander comes out, and just being able to put any land into your graveyard means you draw a card, right? That's a land card going into your graveyard from anywhere, and in particular, you can go get your Dakmor Salvage and then really start going to town. I just did Dralnu Lichlord on one of my deck doctors for one of my patrons, and I talked about it in my 3 mistakes that commander deck builders make, and this is an absolute auto include in that deck because first of all, it has the tap ability that your commander has. So any untappers that you have in your deck, you can reuse your Orc Lore Mage as well. It's putting instants and sorceries into your graveyard that of course you can use with your commander. And then on top of that, the +1/+1 counter thing actually does apply here, right? So when you're putting those instants and sorceries into your graveyard, it's actually putting counters on your Orc Lore Mage, right? Kess, another one. I know it's a really powerful commander and those decks are usually high powered, but still, this seems like a great fit there. You can just go tutor for any card, put it into your graveyard, and then cast it on your turn. I'm really shocked this guy is not in more decks. Coming in at number 3, Tyrite Sanctum, another card that I have touted on my channel pretty much since it first came out in Kaldheim. It's a land, taps for a colorless, and you can pay 2 and tap. Target legendary creature becomes a god in addition to its other types. Put a +1/+1 counter on it. Pay 4 and tap, sacrifice Tyrite Sanctum, put an indestructible counter on target god. Now this card can go in any deck, right? You can put this in any deck, assuming your commander is actually a legendary creature. And really, you can just use it to put +1/+1 counters on your commander, right? This doesn't actually have to use the last ability. You can just repeatedly use that second ability and keep using it over and over again, putting +1/+1 counters on your commander or any of your other legendary creatures. Maybe you're in a +1/+1 counter theme. In any other deck, obviously, you can use it, put a +1/+1 counter on your commander, make it a god, and then the following turn, make it indestructible, which is really good for a lot of decks that don't want their commander removed, obviously. However, if your commander is already a god, you can skip over that second ability. Just go right to the last one and put an indestructible counter on your commander. And there is a lot of gods, obviously the ones that aren't indestructible already. There's a bunch of gods that are indestructible, but the ones that aren't indestructible, from my count, there is 26 commanders in the format that are gods that aren't indestructible. There's a lot. We just had a few more in Baldur's Gate. You don't have to do that first ability there. You can just do the last ability and immediately sacrifice this to put an indestructible counter on your god commander. So make sure you check the creature type of your commander. I just recently played a game with one of my patrons where they had Sviloon, which is a god. And even though it has that ability that gives it indestructible already, this is still worth putting in that deck, I think, in case you don't have the other merfolk lying around. You can just pay 4, put the indestructible counter on your god commander without having to do anything else first. Coming in at number 2, Chandra's Incinerator, 5 and a red elemental 6/6. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to your opponents this turn. It has trample, and whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. Such a fantastic ability if you have a commander that is throwing around non-combat damage. And again, maybe your deck is just throwing around lots of non-combat damage. You know, if you're just in a spell slinger theme, this just turns your lightning bolt into double duty, right? Now, instead of just shooting my opponent's creature for 3 damage, I can just shoot my opponent's face for 3 damage and then kill the creature on top of it, right? It just turns all your burn spells into double duty. But why I'm specifically mentioning this card is because there's so many commanders out there that are doing non-combat damage, throwing that damage around, that this guy is just free value for you. 54 commanders from what I found that are red, obviously, that are using non-combat damage in one way or another, right? This is just your commander doing that. You just look at a creature like Mogus, for example. How many people are putting this in their Mogus deck? That's 2 damage that likely your opponent is going to take because they're probably not going to want to sacrifice the creature. And then that's 2 damage that goes to their face, and then you get to pick off one of their creatures as well. You're probably going to force them to sacrifice a creature in that situation. Just seems like a great fit there. There is so many commanders now in the format that are throwing around that non-combat damage that this just gives you free value. And again, any of those commanders that are dealing damage to any target, now you can, instead of removing your opponent's creatures, if your Chandra's Incinerator is in play, you get double duty, right? You can point that damage at your opponent's face and then remove their creature as well. So it really becomes a win con in your deck, because now you don't have to waste that damage on removing your opponent's creatures. You can go straight face with it and remove their creature as well. Just a fantastic card in so many decks. I think it should see a lot more play. But coming in at number 1 is another card that I've mentioned quite a bit, Nadier, Agent of Duskenel. And again, this is probably the card that I have added to more decks, whether it be my patrons decks or decks I've done on my Underwhelming Commanders videos. I've put this card in so many decks since it's come out. Other than the absolute absolute staples of the format. This might be the card that I've put in more decks than any other. 5 and a black elf warrior 3/3. Whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Nadier, Agent of Duskenel. When Nadier leaves the battlefield, create a number of 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens equal to its power. So a lot of people look at this card and I think they think it's a elf tribal card, right? Because it's an elf and it makes elves. If you get away from the elf thing entirely, I mean, you could do that. If you're in a black-green elf deck, you probably are using a little bit of elf tokens as well. It is a good fit there, but where it's a really good fit is in any token theme, right? This is whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield. Any token, even a treasure token. You sacrifice a treasure token, you're going to put a +1/+1 counter on your Nadier, so he's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger, and he has, most importantly, a leaves the battlefield trigger, which means exile, sacrifice, bounce it to your hand. Doesn't matter what your opponents do, you're going to be getting those green elf tokens when he leaves the battlefield. You can even blink him yourself if you want to. He's currently only in a little over 4,600 decks, which I think is criminal because, again, we've had a ton of these token themes be coming out lately. There's currently, by my count, 84 commanders in the format that are black that are dealing with a token theme in one way or another, right? Whether that be a creature token theme or a treasure token theme or some other token theme, and any of those decks could use a Nadier, Agent of Duskenel because every time those tokens are leaving the battlefield, again, it doesn't matter how they're leaving the battlefield, any token leaving the battlefield is going to put a counter on your Nadier. And then again, you are making tokens, right? You're also making all those green elf tokens, which is probably going to fit a lot of token themes as well. Even in just a straight up aristocrats theme, he's a great fit because a lot of those aristocrats deck are sacrificing token creatures, and then he's just going to make you a whole bunch more token creatures. He's a phenomenal fit, I think, in any aristocrats theme. He goes in so many decks. I think he is a fantastic card that can fit in the 99 out of a ton of decks. Pretty good commander as well, actually, but I definitely think he should see more play. So that is it. Just 5 cards that I think should probably see more play in Commander. I just think that these cards are auto-includes and a lot of strategies depending on whatever archetype you are playing. Really fantastic value you're going to get off of all of them. So take that into consideration. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.